Hello, and welcome to this lecture entitled, The New Negro Resists Jim Crow. We'll cover these four topics. We'll define what we mean by the new Negro and recognize that our definition only applies to the 1877 to about 1920 time frame. We'll look at two approaches to gain full citizenship in which we'll compare the ideas of Booker T. Washington to those of W.E.B. Du Bois. We'll examine political resistance to Jim Crow, particularly the protests against segregated streetcars in the 1904 through 1908 years and the creation of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. We'll also examine economic resistance, how black people created a so-called Black Wall Street in various cities, and we'll look at black separatism as led by Marcus Garvey and the United Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA. Finally, we'll look at how blacks and working class whites voted with their feet in the so-called Great Migration. They left the South for jobs and freedom in industrial cities of the North and West, and they left the countryside for the cities of the South. Let's define the new Negro. In 1925, black writer Claude McKay ushered in the Harlem Renaissance and, by publishing his book entitled The New Negro, appropriated that identifier from association with radical politics that preceded him to association with literary culture. In his significant 1988 article, The Trope of the New Negro, and his introduction to his 2007 edited edition called The New Negro, Henry Louis Gates considers, quote, the period between 1895 and 1925 as the crux of the period of black intellectual reconstruction, unquote, and the beginning of the new Negro trope. So even though our period ends in 1920, we're going to stretch this a bit to 1925 in this lecture. Gates identified this so-called new Negro with, quote, a radical new racial self, the public Negro self, after 1895, unquote. Furthermore, Gates claims that such new Negroes identify themselves in contrast to the so-called old Negroes of the enslavement years, and specifically in contrast to the so-called happy darky trope of servile, docile, ignorant, unrespectable farm workers meant by white supremacists to denigrate African Americans. Instead, the new Negro was moneyed, refined, and above all, educated. To quote Gates again, they, quote, demanded that their citizenship rights be vouchsafed by law, unquote. New Negroes were assertive, even aggressive, and respectable in manners, lifestyle, and even looks. The remainder of this lecture will explain some of the ways this new Negro trope manifested and how the attitude of black people that they had equal citizenship and social rights as white people led them to resist Jim Crow.